By the mid-1960s, Hammer Studios had exhausted its supply of classic Universal monsters, with vampiric counts, stitched-together reanimated corpses, lycanthropic curses, and bandaged Egyptian shamblers all present and accounted for. In response, the creative teams dug out their tomes of Greek mythology and exotic travel guides to conjure two original monsters, both, coincidentally or not, featuring female creatures levying doom upon the locals. For 1964's The Gorgon, much ballyhoo surrounded the announcement that director Terence would be reuniting with his dream team of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee for the first time since 1959's The Mummy. John Gilling's script is an intriguing yarn full of the gothic and melodramatic qualities identified with the studio, and with Hammer's two biggest stars playing against type, and the stunning Barbara Shelley and future Doctor Who, Patrick Troughton, lending magnificent support throughout, the result is a hugely enjoyable time for longtime fans. Meanwhile, 1966's The Reptile sees a deadly epidemic spreading throughout the remote Cornish village of Clagmore Heath. After his brother falls prey to the Black Death, Harry Spalding travels with his new wife to Clagmore to investigate his siblings' mysterious demise. Shot by Gilling on the same sets as his Plague of the Zombies, this Lizardian spin on the classic shape-shifting narrative yields its share of memorable moments, and Hammer mainstay Michael Ripper adds another delightful barkeep role to his impressive resume, though his Tom Bailey is given decidedly more to do than simply tap the kegs. The true star of both of these features is veteran makeup man Roy Ashton, who turns the cast into monsters and victims with equal flair. For Gorgon, he conjures a writhing nest of vipers atop our titular monster's deadly countenance, while those she gazes upon turn stiff and gray. Reptile, on the other hand, sees black and green hues discoloring those suffering the lethal bite, with an impressively scaly, befanged creature showing up in the final reel. For casual Hammer fans who know only the classic Gothic Universal spin-offs and series, the Gorgon and the Reptile reside far below the radar. But those willing to dive deeper will find two satisfying and melancholy melodramas that show off their iconic stars in a different light. It's Hammer time, and deadlier than the male. We got a couple of female-centric Hammer horror flicks to chat about, and I've got an awesome panel to chat about them with me. So let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Jessica Dwyer.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here.
Alan Trump.
Hi, everyone. Always good to talk about Hammer horror, and I promise not to sing the Kate Bush song.
And Mike Mayo.
I am the author of Video Hound's Horror Show, which was written back in the 1990s when Hammer films were, I think, a bit more in vogue than they are now. And I'm really glad to be talking about these two, about any of the Hammer films, really.
And we are, in fact, going to be chatting about Hammer. We're going to talk about The Gorgon from 1964, celebrating its 60th anniversary, and The Reptile from 1966. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I feel like oftentimes we see The Reptile paired with Plague of the Zombies, but I wanted to pair these two because I feel like they don't get enough love collectively, that have our kind of female-centric monsters, not vampires. Mike, I'd love to go ahead and bounce down to you, since you were kind of brought up the fact that Hammer maybe isn't discussed as fervently as it once was. What is your relationship to both of these films, The Gorgon and The Reptile?
I discovered both of them when I was writing the book. I was already a fan of Hammer films. I mean, every horror fan of my generation discovered the Dracula and the Frankenstein, the ones that with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. Those were, required viewing. Everybody saw those. And once you learned about Hammer, then you started wanting to find the others. But until really the video revolution, when tapes became available, were these things, were the titles available for anybody to see. I know that a few of the Hammer films showed up for broadcast on television back in the 60s, but a lot of the titles just didn't. And Hammer, even then, had a reputation for being a little bit sexy and doing things inexpensively, but they had a really classy look to them. And so you kind of went into it expecting that this is going to look better than, say, a Corman film of the same era. And that's why I was really happy to see them at the time. Now they do seem a bit more dated than I remember, but even so, they have a certain charm for that. And I really like both of them. Seeing them again was really a lot of fun. I took a lot of notes watching them and was just really glad that you brought this up and invited me in. This has been a lot of fun to see them again.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to exchanging notes. Alan, how about you? Where did you come in contact with the Gorgon and the Reptile?
Well, they actually show, they actually showed the Gorgon here on St. Louis television in the 70s or 80s when I was growing up on our local, one of our local UHF channels. And I remember watching it for the first time on my parents' TV, black and white TV down in the basement, and watching it again and say, this really is not a movie to watch in black and white. What with the pallor of the victims and with the green of the Gorgon's gown and Barbara Shelley's red hair. I got to, and actually they showed it at a drive-in here in St. Louis a couple months ago.
Oh, wow.
As part of a retrospective. So I did get to see it there. And as for the Reptile, it took me a long time to see it. A friend of mine lived out in San Francisco, and he would tape stuff off of the small channels there, and they played it. And that's the very first place I got to see it when he taped it on VHS for me. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. And Jessica, how about you?
So I think I saw the Reptile first, and I remember seeing images of it in old horror magazines and thinking, oh, that thing's creepy as hell. And I don't know, I can't tell you when I saw the Gorgon the first time, but the thing that stood out for me with the Gorgon was the flip of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really neat. And these two movies are really great when it comes to the character actors that were so much a part of Hammer. With Michael Ripper finally got to be like a main lead
How
character.
about it? Yeah.
Freaking yeah. Like this little guy, he's always, I'm the landlord, I'm the coach driver. No, you get to be a hero here. And I thought that was really great. And then you have in the Gorgon, Barbara Shelley, and the other thing is Noelle Willman gets to be not really a monster in this, and I just really love these two movies, and I never thought in a million years, hanging on my wall right now is a Reptile action figure that I got at Walmart, and I'm like, yes, this is amazing.
That's great. Yeah, well, similar to you, Alan, and I didn't see these for a long time. We did get the occasional, Dracula or Frankenstein that would play on late night creature features. And I remember reading a lot of reference books, and they would talk about the great Hammer legacy. And occasionally, you get Curse the Werewolf would pop up, but it seemed like they only played with like their Universal redos, and I love the fact that both of these films are original horror creatures that Hammer came up with. We hadn't seen a reptile. We hadn't seen a Gorgon. And I really love the Gorgon, the fact that they're bringing that to the screen. I don't know if we had seen that prior in any movie. I don't think we'd ever seen the Gorgon played. We later got it Clash of the Titans, with Harryhausen. But the fact that they brought that mythos into the scene, I was just fantastic. So I was doing a show out in Rockford, Illinois, just outside of Chicago. During the downtime, one of the cast members, they said, my roommate really likes horror too. You guys should get together. And he had this amazing VHS collection. And it was like, just boxes. And I went in and I saw what he had, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And he was like, you could see his face just lighting up when somebody could actually appreciate the treasure that he had, because most people were just like, you got a lot of movies. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you have that movie and you have that movie. And so I basically spent that entire month in Rockford just watching Hammer horror with him as my co-pilot. And I am so grateful to Doug Lamoreau, for bringing me along on the ride. But that's where I saw both of these films for the first time. They're also referenced in a great book called Nightwalkers, that is about the Gothic, kind of the modern Gothic. And Bruce Lanier Wright is the author for that. Well worth checking out. But he talks about, all of the Hammer films, including kind of the main Gothic ones, as well as these kind of offshoots. But Mike, so you said you took a few notes. Let's go ahead and kick things off with the Gorgon, having it being the elder stateswoman, states monster.
Yeah. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And before we go any farther, let me just mention one thing. We all owe some thanks to Anchor Bay Home Video. That's the studio that really brought all of the Hammer stuff. But for the film itself, I remembered it as being more atmospheric than a lot of the horror films of Hammer. Then didn't really have the big scares till towards the end.
Right.
But Hammer did setting so well. They didn't have a whole lot of sets, but boy, they made the most of them.
Yeah, Bernard Robinson, the production designer, just a wizard with a budget. He would constantly repurpose sets and redress them. Knew how to get a lot of bang for his buck.
I really like the costumes in it too. To me, they did a lot to set that the whole atmosphere of it and make that time and place more believable, I think, than normally they would have been.
Yeah. And this is directed by Terence Fisher, who, of course, was Hammer's heavy hitter when it came to directing.
He just had an eye for it. I mean, his work just it looked unlike anything else. Like his films look like, kind of in the way Corman had it as well, they look like fairy tales, and there was such a lushness to them. It was another world.
Yeah.
How he did his movies.
Yeah, I mean, this is a good 9 years on from Curse of Frankenstein, and then the next year was Horror of Dracula. Like, he'd really kind of refined the Hammer touch. I mean, he was one of those who kind of gave Hammer its distinctive look and gave them a template to follow. And he was the guy tagged on a lot of the big films, the Frankensteins, the Dracula, Curse of Werewolf, the Phantom of the Opera, etc. Alan, what are some thoughts on Terence Fisher?
Just his style in this movie. A couple shots that really come to mind are when Paul, is one of the Gorgon's victims, is thrashing around in bed and suddenly stares into the camera, and his face is partially in shadow, partially in light, and Barbara Shelley comes running in. And also there's that great shot when he's in the ruins of Castle Borsky. Is that what Castle and Barbara Shelley turns up wearing that, voluminous cape of hers that look like they're right out of Black Sunday, that Mario Bava could have done it. So his style was absolutely incredible in this and all of his other films.
He really knew how to use color.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's kind of what was setting Hammer apart, Mike. I mean, your book talks about that extensively, how, like they were taking the Universal classics and giving them a facelift, giving them a whole breathing new life into them.
And doing it on the same kind of budget that Universal did when they made the originals. And that's something else that doesn't get a whole lot of attention. But, at the time, the original Universal horror pictures were made, that saved the studio. They didn't cost a lot of money to make. They didn't have big stars in them. And they sold a whole lot of tickets and really kept that studio alive. And, I think Hammer managed to do the same thing. I am not an expert at all on the history of the studio. I just know their films. And I learned early on that if you saw the Hammer name on it, it's worth a look. Just, stop right there and give it a try.
When their Gothic color films came out, it launched a whole new wave. As Jessica referred to, Roger Corman was inspired to do his American International Poe series with Vincent Price. And we saw all sorts of Italian horrors start to come to rise. I mean, the colors of Mario Bava probably would not have come around had we not had Hammer kind of lighting the way.
And I've got to say, I watched both of these again on DVD. And I think for the first time, I really appreciated the color, because now I've got a very nice television set, so I could really see that. And especially since there's not a whole lot of plot to get too involved with in either one of them, there's a lot to look at on the screen worth looking at.
Yeah, agreed. Let's talk a little bit about the plot. Alan, do you mind kind of giving us a brief synopsis of the Gorgon?
We start off with a young couple, an artist and his girlfriend, who unfortunately wind up the victims of foul play. The woman has passed away, and the artist, they're looking for him. And when Peter Cushing's character, Dr. Namarov, brings in the body, it turns out that at his local insane asylum, it turns out that it's been petrified, turned to stone. And they look for the artist, and they've discovered that he's hung himself. As the artist's father winds up coming to the village, he discovers that they've been plagued by this strange affliction. These sort of murders or deaths have been going on for some time. And to help clear his son's name, he's trying to go in and discover what curse is on this village. It turns out that Peter Cushing's character has reasons for hushing the whole thing up. Barbara Shelley is his faithful assistant who's in there, who knows more, or she's more than she appears.
Yes.
And as they go through, the artist's father winds up a victim of whatever this strange malady is himself, writes a letter to his son in one of the best scenes as he's being turned to stone.
Yeah.
And so that brings more people in. You have a police inspector, I think his name is Kanoff, played by Patrick Troughton, the second Doctor Who. After they get word of this, the artist's brother, Paul, if I have the name right, I hope.
Yep.
Paul winds up coming in and see if he can resolve the problem. He becomes involved with the lovely Carla, that is Barbara Shelley's character, and he also almost perishes because of this. And so he winds up having his employer, Professor Meister, played by Christopher Lee, in nice mutton chops and mustache. And he knows something of the mythology of the Gorgon, and he begins to suspect that somehow the spirit of the Gorgon's sister, Megara, has incarnated in this village and is raising havoc. And he's trying to find out who this unfortunate incarnation is.
That was great, Alan. Nice job. As somebody pointed out earlier, there's not a lot of plot to this movie, even though that just sounded like a lot of plot. Really, it's somebody gets afflicted and somebody else comes to find out, and somebody gets afflicted and somebody else comes to find out. It's just this like train of people to the village of Winsdorf. And I was watching, I was like going, wow, like the train service to that little village is constantly going. You check in, but you can never leave, you know.
And after that, it's a matter of going from one house to another and back to the first one, to the inn,
and it does star Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. However, they're not kind of the headliners. They are very much an ensemble. It's and you never kind of know who's going to make it to the end. I mean, everybody feels expendable in this one. I was like when Paul's father comes and you think he's going to be the hero, you know, you think he's going to be the one who kind of susses things out, and he's done in like a matter of 10-15 minutes. I was like, oh, that's right. He's not long for this movie.
Well, and one thing that I find funny about it is basically an entire like family gets wiped out in this movie.
Yeah.
Like the Gorgon. It's like, after you think about it, you're like, that family line's done.
They're done. It all ends here.
But one thing that always stood out for me for this movie is the fact that we figure out who the hero is really at the end. But all of these people, except I would say for the father, die because of an obsession of beauty. Paul has this just obsession with Carla, and it ends up being his downfall. And Dr. Namiroff, the same thing. It's this obsession, that need, and because of this desire, the same thing with the beginning with the artist, his brother, who dies. Again, it's about obsession and with beauty, just because of his art. It's their downfall, all of them. The only one that has a head on his shoulders that isn't stone is Christopher Lee. It's great to see him play a hero type in one of these. I think the only other time he really kind of does it, other than Horror Express, is with The Devil Rides Out.
Yeah.
And it's always great to see him be this stoic type.
Yeah, I liked seeing them kind of like flip the Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee dynamic.
Yeah, very much.
Cushing is usually the hero and Lee is kind of the heavy. And I also love the fact that Lee is kind of playing this kind of scruffy professor. You know, he's not all dignified. He's got the kind of wild mustache, and just I love how he just doesn't take any crap from anybody.
Yeah.
He's got that great line when he sees Paul about, "Ill, you look like you were in your grave and you're pulling out."
The other thing I have to call out is the fact that you've got 2 Doctor Who's in this movie.
Yeah.
And that's amazing. I love that. I love that Peter Cushing and Patrick Troughton are on the screen together, and you've got 2 Who's. And Patrick Troughton typically plays a heavy in these, and he's playing a police officer.
Yeah, I didn't even recognize him, because he usually, for Hammer stuff especially, he gets pretty
Grizzled.
scuzzy, you know, and here he's all, you know, dressed up, got his little mustache in place.
Like Scars of Dracula, he does that one because he's the he's the henchman. He has that one shot in that just creeps me the hell out, where he just smiles at the camera and he looks like Satan, and it's like, oh, Jesus Christ.
Well, and we better mention just really quick that he is the priest in the original Omen, who, you know, meets his demise. Patrick Troughton had a great career in the genre and without, but yes, he's certainly well known as the Second Doctor. But I'm glad you mentioned Peter Cushing as Doctor Who, because we were talking about Alan and I were talking about him for the At the Earth's Core episode, where he's just kind of fun and giggly, and his Doctor Who is a much lighter version than we're used to seeing. And I feel like the same thing's true here with Christopher Lee. Like, we're just seeing a lighter version of Lee than we're used to.
Well, they're lighter characters, than particularly when you can consider them the characters they played in the Frankenstein and Dracula films. These guys are almost like light opera or something.
There's a melodrama quality to it.
Yes.
Not necessarily in a bad way, just, you know, like,
that's the kind of movie it is.
it's a fairy tale, like Jessica said.
Well, and also goes, there's a darkness to this movie too that people, I think, skip over, which is the fact that the girl who gets stoned, I guess you would say, is pregnant.
Yeah,
right.
So it's, you know,
spoiler alert.
Yeah, sorry guys.
That's the first like a minute. I think we're okay.
It's kind of obvious.
Yeah, but yeah, so there's like, oh man, that goes, you don't hear that often in these kind of movies, and that just adds a nice little, you know, evil to it.
So this script is written by John Gilling, who we'll talk about when we discuss The Reptile, because he was the director for that. But John Gilling has a long history with the horror genre. One of his first films as a director was Vampire Over London. But then some of the others he had were The Gamma People, Flesh and the Fiends, Shadow of the Cat, also with Barbara Shelley, Blood Beast from Outer Space. And then he did Reptile and Plague of the Zombies in 1966 for Hammer. But he'd also done a couple of pirate movies with Hammer as well. So he was very well established at this point. And Gilling was a bit of a grouch sometimes when it came to people messing with his scripts. And this was one of those where he had written the script and felt like it had been tinkered with a bit And he's like, you know what? It could have been a really good movie if they just left it alone.
Oh,
Not sure I go that far, but
The other thing, I mean, we talk about Barbara Shelley. I mean, she's kind of the secret weapon in this one
yeah.
on many levels. Mike, any thoughts on Barbara Shelley in this film and then in general?
Hammer was so good at finding very attractive actresses that you didn't see many other places, and really making them look good. And again, that is exactly the same thing that Universal did back when they were making these films in the first place too. They had I hesitate to use the word stable of very young, attractive actresses. May not have been the best actresses in the world, but they certainly did what those roles needed. And were all, just very interesting to look at, to watch. I agree exactly with what you were saying, that she is the main reason to watch this. She is just so good in it. Nobody else in the film even approaches her in the way that they look, what they have to do, everything. That was something that I hadn't really realized the first time. And with both of these films, you've also got the whole business of they're about, in some ways, men fundamentally not understanding women. A universal truth that we can all agree on.
Hammer was an equal opportunity monster maker, and it was ahead of its time in that regard, because with not even just the Gorgon and the Reptile, you had Frankenstein Creates Woman, you have Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. These are movies that had original female monsters in them, or took the trope and spun it on its head. Like with Frankenstein Created Woman, he became the creature for all intents and purposes, and Sister Hyde was the one that was the killer, and that was unique. I think there wasn't a lot of that going on. And then God Almighty, Carmilla. I mean, you had the whole Karnstein slate of movies that were just, Ingrid Pitt was a badass. I mean, and then Barbara Shelley, when in the Dracula franchise,
Prince of Darkness,
exactly, becomes just she's just vicious. And they really were ahead of the curve by creating these female creatures.
Kind of going on that topic of Hammer glamour, because that was one of their trademarks, was they had beautiful women and there was a lot more flesh, a lot more blood, and it just kind of made them feel more adult, more racy and exciting for the times. But Barbara Shelley and people like Ingrid Pitt were genuinely good actors as well. Like, they weren't just another pretty face. And Barbara Shelley is a standout, as you said, in Dracula, Prince of Darkness. I love her in Quatermass in the Pit. She's just a terrific performer. And what she does here is very nuanced. She suspects something is wrong, and she's constantly fighting for her own identity. She doesn't want to belong to Namaroff, and she doesn't necessarily want to belong to anybody. She wants to be free to choose her own path.
One thing about her, not so much in this film, she plays pretty much the same character who's kind of deluded. She knows something's going wrong. She's believable in going from one extreme to the other. Like in Dracula, Prince of Darkness, she starts off as the prim, wife, and then Dracula corrupts her and she becomes, all sexy and takes out her hair and, feral. And in Rasputin, the Mad Monk, power, she throws the young Tsar off a roof so that Rasputin can administer him. And of course, like you said, in Quatermass in the Pit, she, one moment, an able scientist, the next moment screaming her lungs out because she contacted the Martian collective unconscious. Yeah, very versatile.
Yeah, terrific performer.
And if we're not getting ahead, I think we should mention that in both the Gorgon and the Reptile, these are monsters that are kind of fundamentally sympathetic. They are more sinned against than sinner, and I think that's a characteristic they share with all of the great monsters. I think
that is kind of a parallel we see with both of these films, is that these are unwilling monsters These are monsters that have had this curse put upon them. So to your point, like they are very sympathetic, and in some ways we're rooting for them to beat the curse as opposed to, looking for the hero to conquer the monster.
They're also both imported monsters to the area they are. So they're even more alien to where they're at than anything else as well. And I thought that was kind of neat about both of these, is that they're both, you have a Greek mythology coming into play, and then you have Indian mythology come into play in the other. And it's neat to see that, in a setting that's so rural England,
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I actually hadn't thought about the fact that they are imported, but yeah, they are foreign monsters, and come to take our women.
One thing that is in Gilling's script that I thought is very interesting, of course, being the colossal nerd that I am, I looked up the myth of the Gorgon, and there's no Gorgon named Megara.
Yeah, They conjured that out of whole cloth.
But Megara is one of the Furies.
Yep.
Another, so I think the name
just kind of
sounded better. So
Gorgon adjacent.
Yeah. The melding of the two mythologies. My wife walked in. She's like, I don't remember a Gorgon named Megara. And I'm like, nope. Nor should you.
Well, and that's the whole story of Medusa, who's the Gorgon everyone knows, is just a tragedy. And it's kind of ironic. This turns into a Greek tragedy at the end of everything that happens in this. But the whole thing with Medusa was men, specifically gods, would not allow her to just be. And that's what happens to her. And it's,
she gets cursed because of men's actions.
Right, exactly. And it's just a tragedy all the way around. And that's something I think this, with how this movie ends, it's very good at keeping that tragedy element to it.
Well, and the other kind of secret weapon here, not so secret weapon, is makeup man Roy Ashton, because he not only creates the titular monster, but as Alan alluded to, the petrification effects are very effective and kind of gruesome and weird, watching them kind of slowly turn into stone.
I think much more effective than the actual effect of the monster herself with her little snake heads.
Yeah.
I think I heard at one point they were thinking about actually putting grass snakes, live snakes into the hair.
Yeah, back in the day, Barbara Shelley was going to play both parts, and that was the original design, was that she was going to have like actual live grass snakes, in the hair moving around. I think
pay me enough. No.
it ended up being another actor, Prudence Hyman, and I'm not quite sure why they made that decision, other than they were worried that those early glimpses might tip off the mystery.
Yeah.
But I got to say, the mystery is pretty thin. I don't think any of us are like, who could it be?
Surprise, it's Peter Cushing.
Yeah, that would have been a good one.
Yeah.
Peter Cushing would have turned out to be the Gorgon. As kind of goofy as the Gorgon's rubber snakes are, I do like their kind of full tilt approach to it, in that we've got you want a Gorgon? Here's a Gorgon. It's got snakes in its hair. And I love the kind of the fake head at the end, spoiler everybody, but where they all retract in and she transforms back into Carla. I was like, that's a really cool, even if you aren't able to realize it in a realistic way, the theatricality of it, I was on board 100%.
Yeah.
I also liked how they tweaked the mythology. He did a really great job creating this in a way that was sort of like a lycanthrope type of tale.
Yeah, the full moon aspect.
I really liked that. That was a neat way to spin this, to make it into a classic Gothic story. And that was really well done.
And they worked in kind of the legend of the siren too, because
right.
Singing that
she
song.
sings.
Yeah.
And that draws the people to her.
I wish I could have gone when you went and saw the Gorgon and Curse of the Mummy's Tomb, and you got the free black stamps. And for the Reptile, of course, you had Reptile with Rasputin. You got the free Rasputin beards. So
Yeah.
kind of missing out on a little bit of that hoopla. I wish I'd been there for that.
I know. Where is the ballyhoo today? Come on, folks.
I mean,
It's
if you
awesome.
want a really pervy popcorn bucket, you can
Yeah,
go
that's
to
it. It's the
Red
popcorn
Bull
buckets now.
or Dune 2.
So let's talk about 1966's The Reptile, where John Gilling takes the director's chair. It was part of a 4-film deal with 20th Century Fox and 7 Arts, and which included Plague of the Zombies, Rasputin the Mad Monk, Reptile, and what's our last one?
Yeah,
The
it was Dracula, Prince of Darkness.
It was
I
Dracula,
just
Prince of
had to
Darkness. Yeah,
look.
because they're filming on the same sets, and The Reptile was the last of the 4, and it was the only one that came in under budget. Because the others had gone over, and so they were like leaning on Gilling to be like, seriously, bring one of these in under budget, please.
When I was doing the original Video Hounds horror show, and was really making sure that I got all of the hammers in, and this was again when they were first coming out on videotape, and the people at Anchor Bay were very good about sending me screener copies.
Nice.
And so that's how I saw it first. Seeing it again, I had very much the same reaction that I did with the Gorgon, in that it looks so good. It's the difference in quality between the image that I was getting on my TV set and the VHS tape, and the much nicer DVD and 4K screen and everything. I think for the first time, seeing it now, I really appreciated the look of the whole thing even more than I had before.
Yeah. Shout Factory put out a really nice Blu-ray
I got it.
not too long ago, and tons of extras on there. So, and did they do the Gorgon as well? Did they do?
I don't think they've done.
I don't
the
think
Gorgon,
they did.
but
I
they
say I
did-
have the Reptile, but not the Gorgon.
They did Rasputin around
Yep.
the same time they released the Reptile, and I got both of those.
And Plague of the Zombies
Yeah.
as well. Alan, how about you?
Oh, like I said, I managed to see it when a friend of mine taped it off of San Francisco television.
Right.
But one of my first acquaintances with it is, if not Famous Monsters, would have been Dennis Gifford's an illustrated history, a pictorial history of the horror movie, where it has, like Jessica was saying, that scene with the fangs bared reptile about to bite it, its female victim.
Bearing down on Jennifer Daniel.
Yeah. So that really impressed me. I will say about this one has a lot more action to it than the Gorgon did. You've got all of those attacks of something in the shadows lunging out. So I really appreciated having the opportunity to see that. And I always think it's interesting when there's a little bit of with films like this, there's a little bit of love of the exotic cultures, but also terror of the exotic.
Yeah.
This is another one. I saw it, but I can't tell you when I first saw it. The book definitely was something that I saw this image, and I was fascinated as a little kid by the design, because it didn't look like anything else I'd ever seen.
Yeah.
It was a really good makeup. Just terrifying, just those big eyes, and I didn't remember that there were scenes of her with her eyes closed, and how I don't know if they created 2 applications for that or what, but just really creepy. And the thing that I this last time when I went back to rewatch it again just for this was, oh yeah, the skin shedding. Oh God, that's just gross. And he just beats the crap out of the skin, and it's like, oh, that's gnarly. But one thing that, like you were saying, that stuck out with me rewatching this again is the aspect of it where you have the colonizer type getting his, for want of a better phrase, his balls put in a bag by the overseas Indian culture that they've subjugated prior, and they've basically, you don't know what he did to make them that angry.
Right.
but it was probably something not great. And this basically takes, he is repaid back by the one thing that he loved most in the world being taken from him and corrupted in their eyes by this. And I thought that was a really interesting, you don't really see that in a lot of these classic horror films where it's something like this. And they kind of do it in Plague of the Zombies, where you have another culture kind of coming in and taking over. But this is even more so because you have the guy that's keeping an eye on things.
Yeah, the melee manservant.
Exactly. Yeah, and he's always there, and he's basically, slapping him around, saying, "Nope, you're gonna have to deal with this forever and
for the rest of your life." Yeah.
Yeah, and so I thought that was a really interesting insight into that.
And the movie starts off very similar to the Gorgon, where we have the death of a local townsperson and a family member comes to investigate. Similarly, it's one of those inexplicable deaths. We're not sure how this person died. It's a rather gruesome, and another great makeup by Roy Ashton when the reptile bites somebody and they just turn like that kind of greenish black and they're foaming at the mouth. It's a really terrific horror effect. But in this case, we have the brother who comes to town, Harry Spalding, played by Ray Barrett rather. And it's all about investigating what happened to his brother. And much like the other film, there have been a spate of these mysterious deaths that everybody's covering up.
And one thing we ought to mention before we go any further, for younger viewers who are used to today's special effects, the practical effects in these movies they really impressed us back in the day when we saw them for the first time. Compared to what you see in anything today with the digital stuff, they're probably not going to be too much for kids, but it was a different world, but we got just as much enjoyment out of those movies then, and you still can now if you appreciate them.
Yeah, actually, if I can piggyback on that, I think in some ways this is a good kind of gateway for younger viewers because you can tell that it's a makeup. You can tell in the same way that seeing a guy in a suit is a great way to kind of get into horror because you're like, okay, I know that's a guy. It's not real. But I love the fact that we do have a really original monster design, again, by Roy Ashton. And Jacqueline Pierce actually does play the monster in this one. Yep. She plays both parts. We had seen her in Plague of the Zombies as one of the first on-screen victims.
Yep.
And she is so great in that movie, and I'm so glad they decided to give her another part. And she just owns this movie. She is so magnetic every time she comes on screen.
I agree, and I think that she plays the part of even more so, I think, than Barbara Shelley. She is more sympathetic in terms of her character. Like she's desperately trying to, it's very, very, very heavily implied that her menagerie of animals are her food, and she's like, I love animals. And it's like, yeah, for dinner, and it's like you can tell that's like she's tortured by it, and she has those giant eyeballs that are just. Not as the reptile, they're big then too. But but she's got these big doe eyes, and she's just stunning, and you want to help her. And I got to do a shout out here for all of you like me who are like, does the pet die in the movie? The pet doesn't die in the reptile.
Much to Harry's chagrin, he's like, Valerie, get back here. He goes back into the burning building, comes back with the cat. I'm like,
getting my cat.
Yep.
That'd be me. I'd be like, I'm gonna die with my dog, so you better just let me go grab it.
It was also a kind of a nice touch, I thought, at the end, where the distressed father, whose daughter is cursed and is contemplating putting her out of her misery, then goes to the animals' cages and opens them up like, I'm about to set her free. I set you free too.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on, and I love the little details that we see throughout. We talked about it a little bit earlier, but I want to give our full spotlight to Michael Ripper at this point
Oh, yes.
because he is, Hammer royalty, and he's one of those who makes a Hammer film just that much more special. He's a fantastic character actor, and you see him pop up all the time, as Jessica said, atop a coach or behind a bar, or in a grave. It's like he's just always there. But he really is given a full character to play here, and is a main driver of the plot.
And he lives, which
Yeah.
is always a nice touch. Like, I kept thinking, does he die in this? God, that'd suck, because this is like, because I couldn't remember. I'm like, did they get him? No, they don't. And it's so neat to see one of these guys just, make it through and be a hero for once in one of these and be a main lead.
Yeah.
If any of our viewers aren't familiar with Michael Ripper, he's this little short guy with this great, interesting face and incredible energy. He just, everything he does, you can tell he's just bursting to do more. And he really does make the movie.
And he's got a great voice. He's got a very, it's like, it's like very, you can recognize him.
It would be interesting to see if he has the most lines in this film than any of his other, because generally
Probably.
the house, he runs he's a grave robber, or he runs the local tavern or something, which he does here.
He really is kind of the hero, as Jessica said. He's kind of the one who saves the day consistently.
He's sort of the Van Helsing in this piece.
Yeah, he really is. He really is. Roy Ashton, as I mentioned, did the makeup, and this was his last film for Hammer. He'd done quite a few designs with them, including Oliver Reed in Curse the Werewolf. But after this, he went on to work with Tyburn and Amicus and Disney. So he has a very long and illustrious career, well worth checking out his stuff. And kind of to Mike's point, this was done on a budget, and it was done under time constraints. Roy Ashton always said he never quite had enough time or money to do the things that he wanted to do. And this monster of the reptile, like when we see it pop up in reference books, it's very monster forward. Like there was no hiding this monster. Like we saw the Gorgon and we saw the reptile pop up all the time in reference books. And that was what we wanted to see. We were like excited to see that monster. And I'm really pleased that the reptile gets as much screen time as it gets for its shortcomings. I think it's a really original and fun design.
It is. I just wish they had brought the explanation of it into it earlier, to have begun to explain how this creature happens to be here, at least to suggest that there's this Indian connection more than they did. Have all that exposition right there at the end. That's just grammatically, it's a mistake.
It's the definition of an exposition dump.
Yeah, totally.
I was like, wow, there's so much information being imparted right now while
my
flames
house
are
is burning down.
Exactly.
I'll tell you what happened.
Now maybe it's not the best time to be explaining all this when we go outside, maybe.
And we got to let the animals go too.
I just have to say, I'm really happy that I'm seeing, like I said at the beginning, I have a doll of the reptile. I never thought there would be such a thing. And I have next to her a Plague of the Zombies doll, the same. And next to that, like I have a whole wall of them. There's Mego is they're doing these, all the Hammer films. And it's neat to see the lesser known like these get their due. Yeah. Like you're wearing the t-shirt, and I know that they just did, Fright Rags did a line of them. And I think that it's good for people to see, like, everybody knows the Dracula and the Frankenstein, but they did a lot more. And I like that these films are getting their due as well, because they were, unique. They were new.
Yeah. I mean, Hammer did, yes, they did all these. And I think this kind of falls under that Gothic umbrella. Like it definitely feels like one of their Gothics. But they did black and white thrillers that were kind of inspired by Psycho. They did like dinosaur movies, tons of adventure films. So the Hammer well is very deep and wide. And while everybody thinks of the Draculas and the Frankensteins and the mummies, it's worth digging deeper into the Hammer canon and finding, the good stuff that lies within.
Well, like Oliver Reed did a number of those black and white thrillers, and they're fantastic.
Yeah.
And I know he's got a problematic history of him personally, but to a lot of people, but I loved him in everything he did.
Yeah.
His werewolf is one of the best.
I mean, look at his face.
Yeah.
That man was made to be a
And a
werewolf.
really cool villain in These Are the Damned.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That's a great little, and that one's a terribly underseen little black and white sci-fi flick from Hammer's The Damned, or These Are the Damned. Thanks for bringing that up, Alan.
That's the thing is everybody gives, and I'm wearing this. I love Christopher Lee. I love Peter Cushing, but you have. I wanted to bring up Noel Willman again. I keep butchering his last name, but this was like a little mini Kiss of the Vampires reunion in this with him and Jennifer Danielle.
Yeah, I
loved his vampire. I loved that whole look. He had that hair, and in this he's really good and very tragic, and it's neat to see these character actors like him, like Michael Ripper, that no one knows them by name as much as like geeks like us.
Right.
But they're there, and that's something that I really appreciate about this movie as well.
One of my favorite little supporting parts is Mad Peter.
Oh, yeah,
who I completely forget about every time. And then every time he pops up, I'm like, I love John Laurie as Mad Peter. Like, he just steals the movie for like 5 minutes and then goes away.
Him and the chicken bone need to go get married.
He's trying to get every drop of nourishment that he can.
God. Yeah.
Okay, viewers, you're going to have to watch the movie to get that reference.
Yeah. It's well, you won't forget it once you get it.
It's interesting. One thing that reading one book, they said that, and honestly, I've never read the Bram Stoker story. I've seen the Ken Russell movie. They noted certain similarities to Lair of the White Worm.
Yeah.
With this film.
Yeah, Mike. I know Mike wants to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah. After seeing these two, I had to go back and take another look at Lair of the White Worm. And oh man, that is it's such a trip.
Yeah, and
I was the head of the Peter Capaldi as Van Helsing train for a very long time, and I still feel that needs to happen because he literally is Peter Cushing reincarnated to the point that he actually said in a QA, and I think I'm the reason he said this. He said that he based his signature off of Peter Cushing's signature because he had his autograph, and he's like, we have the same initials, so I just kind of stole his autograph. And so every time you get a Peter Capaldi autograph, people, you're also getting Peter Cushing.
Tell us a little bit about Lair of the White Worm, Mike and or Alan.
I just remember Amanda Donahue with the fangs.
Oh, yes. She's
spitting on the crucifix.
Well, and again, very monster forward. Like, that's the image we saw in all of the magazines and things like that, was Amanda Donahue as the reptile.
And she is, how to put this? It turns out that her house, she's kind of the lady of the English countryside. She's got a big house there, but she only comes to visit every so often. And it turns out that her house is kind of attached by a tunnel to this big cave where this giant white worm lived. And our hero, his ancestor, killed the white worm some time back. And we've got Hugh Grant and Peter Capaldi as our two heroes. And Catherine Oxenberg is Hugh's fiance. And then when Amanda shows up, well, her first victim is a Boy Scout who unwisely gets in the car with her in the rain and is never seen again. And before it's all over, we have had Hugh Grant walking around the inside of this big empty house, in a kilt playing the bagpipes.
Oh, that's Peter Capaldi.
Oh, is that Capaldi? That's right.
Capaldi.
That's right. He was up in the cavern, and
Yeah,
Capaldi is marching around with the bagpipes, and it is absolutely indescribable. There's also a big party scene right in the middle of it, with a kind of a nice dance number going on in it, and lots of Ken Russell craziness. Amanda Donohue's performance is fearless. Yeah. She's buck naked an awful lot of the time, and just seems to be having a wonderful time with it. I'm not sure Hugh Grant knew what kind of movie he was in. But if you've not seen it, it's worth a look.
And I'll just take a quick side road here to say that Ken Russell's horror efforts are always worth checking out. Yes. The Devils is a terrific, featuring Oliver Reed and Vanessa Redgrave. As flawed as it might be, I like Gothic. But yeah, he's such an interesting filmmaker, and when he turns his sights on the horror genre, it's usually something special.
You may laugh, but you won't be bored.
There's two things I have to call out in Lair the White Worm, because I saw that when I was 13, 14 years old, and I was a huge Hugh Grant fan, and then I saw Peter Capaldi, and I'm like, I forgot completely about Hugh Grant, and then Peter Capaldi disappeared until he became the Doctor, but at least to me, because I didn't see the thick of it over here until much later. But two things that really stood out for me was the fact that her coffin was a tanning bed, and they have that scene where she comes out of the tanning bed. It looks very, very coffin-like. And then there's also her car, which as it's going through the shrouded fog, looks like a snake. Mm-hmm. And it's but this movie, if you have a problem with very anti-Christianity imagery, you're gonna not want to watch this. There's a whole sequence of a convent being attacked and ravaged in various and sundry ways, but it's such a weird, odd, beautiful film, and it's very funny.
Really funny.
It's very funny. It's so weird. I mean, it is a dark comedy, but Amanda Donohoe in this just eats up the screen. She just is having a blast. And and then there's pickled earthworms. That's another thing that you find in this.
How about those?
It's a delicacy.
But yes, anybody who has seen The Reptile and Lair the White Worm, you'll be able to pick up pretty quickly on the similarities. Although Lair the White Worm, that is certainly a monster who enjoys being a monster, whereas Reptile, she's much more of a reluctant monster. Didn't ask for this. I love the scene, however, where she's playing the sitar, and there's a whole story that's being played out without any words at all between her and her father.
Yes,
and I just find that scene such a fascinating one. There's so much subtext going on there, and Willman, as Dr. Franklin, the guilt that he carries is so palpable throughout the entire movie, and he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know how to right the wrong that he has committed, and he is suffering along with his daughter, and in some ways suffering more.
Yeah, it's such a, you kind of can build your own background in that scene, like almost like has she seen her father as the bad guy here? What did he do, to cause this? Because it had to be a massive travesty of something. And you see her kind of taunting him with the playing of the instrument. And then he just slowly loses it and smashes the thing. But you've got to wonder, did she willingly go with them because of what happened? You don't know.
Yeah.
It really hurt me to see him smash that instrument at the end.
Oh, man.
Again, spoiler alert. I hope it was some kind of prop they'd made up.
I don't think they had too many sitars lying around.
Giant sitars, too, man. That thing was huge.
It is interesting that she's wearing a sari. It's almost, I hate to use the word this is an old offensive term, gone native. This has burned them so bad, their love of these cultures, but still they still have a romantic relationship with this thing. Not to put too much stuff into, not to read too much into it. One thing is, when I first watched it, I thought, oh, I wish they didn't have her talk at the end, that she kept her more monstrous. Right. And yet, when I watched it this time, I thought, she really seems vulnerable here. She's driven with this need to kill, but she's just this young woman, and
I'm similar. I feel the same. Is that I wish she hadn't talked. I wish she had remained a monster. But it does reveal the humanity beneath. So it's a worthwhile, even though it doesn't necessarily play fair. I think it's effective.
It's kind of like in the new Wolfman with Benicio del Toro. He actually speaks and says her name as he's transformed, and it's like they're still in there.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's what we're trying to show.
Yeah.
Even the last time I watched the movie The Omega Man, and again, this is maybe reading too much into it, but for English gentlemen who we are superior to the lands that we have colonized and things like that. It's a pretty ironic doom to wind up dark-faced with poison.
Oh, wow.
Oh. Well, you went there.
I was going to say, there's your next thesis, Alan. I like that. Speaking of which, I do want to give credit to our actor, Marnie Maitland, who plays the Malay manservant, because much like Jacqueline Pierce, when he is on screen, he is so charismatic, and you genuinely sense that this is somebody who burns with a righteous anger, a righteous vengeance, and is going to basically be the monitor of the curse. He's going to make sure the curse continues to be played out as long as possible, as long as it is deserved.
And he's a guy you do not screw with.
No.
He like bitch slaps him at one point, and I'm like,
Yep. The master of the house is not the master here.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that I wanted to call out really quickly with both of these movies is they are not the plot lines are not your typical romantic lead saves the day kind of a thing.
Right. Yeah. We're not on vacation.
Yeah. No, you have in the Gorgon, you have everything goes wrong. There's no real hero other than Christopher Lee, and he's kind of like, I have no skin in this game.
Yeah.
Like I don't have anything here.
Last man standing, but
and then with the Reptile, it's no one's in love, or there's no her romantic hero type for her. It's literally another tragedy where it's the married couple are there, but they don't have. It's kind of odd, that whole relationship. You would think that they just kind of get swept into this. But it's not your typical plot line.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, Jessica. I actually hadn't thought about it, but like a stereotypical Hammer film would have to involve a romance with Anna. Like, that would be that, kind of Wolfman thing going on where there's a romantic relationship that is foiled by the curse. But no, she's just cursed. And
I mean, you could look at it as her father would be, maybe there was some, I don't know, there's no mom, but who knows how it is in their house. But it's like she's totally alone other than her father, and he's not great company. So it's really not the same, and that's really interesting to me.
No, great point.
I did have a question just for the group, and this isn't so much on the movie itself, but does anybody know what it is about the area of Cornwall that Cornwall seems to have this? If you talk to people from the UK, it has this reputation for being haunted and ghosts, and has this bleak shoreline with crashing rocks and waves, and I think it has some ties to the Arthurian legends and stuff. Does anybody know anything about that? Or
I think it's like Whitby in that way. It's a coastal town kind of a thing. And I think it's got a lot to do possibly too with the fact that they have ships coming in, and you have that whole thing in that area where you have sailors and stories and shipwrecks and tragedy with that. It just is a really good setting for that kind of lore to come out.
Okay.
Although that's funny because it's an island. I mean, how many? There's so many coastal towns. I mean, there's the coast anywhere you look.
Yeah, I mean, but it's true. I mean, I think that's the way that you get so many good stories out of that area.
Yeah.
Is that you have all of that coming in.
Well, any final thoughts on Hammer, our double feature of today? Anything else you want to impart?
Finding things on your own is what really horror is all about. You can listen to us talk and everything, but go out and search the video stores, if there are any video stores left, and all the places where you can find these titles and see what you really like on your own, because develop your own taste.
Yeah. I will tell everybody, both of these movies are available to stream for free online. The Reptile is actually part of the Internet Archive.
Yep.
And they have the entirety of the Gorgon on YouTube for free to stream. Just my parting thought is, again, Hammer was ahead of the curve, and more so than even today when it came to women, female monsters in their films. It was neat to see this, and definitely check it out if you're, want to see the girls get bloody as well.
Yeah. They're not damsels in distress. They are doling it out.
They will bite you. You won't like it.
There's two scenes in here that I think really still for me stand out watching, three. In the Gorgon, we already mentioned the people are turning slowly to stone. That's an incredible effect. Also, when they wheel in the body and the petrified finger breaks off.
Yeah.
That's a great scene. And in the Reptile, like Jessica mentioned, when the distraught father starts beating on his daughter's shed skin.
Yeah.
Oh, pretty incredible.
Yeah. And I will say that where she's kind of like writhing under the blanket, and you don't know what's under there.
Even in this day and age, people drooling, whether it's from poison or what, that's still a pretty big taboo. So.
Oh, the froth. You mentioned the frothing at the mouth. I just want to call out the inconsistency of the reptile's poison.
Oh.
And the fact that after she bites the husband, and he has enough time to run home.
Whoa, okay. That's because she bit him through the paper collar.
Oh, okay.
She bit him through the collar, and so that didn't get as much poison in. Like that's
and they lance the wound.
Yeah,
well, how did he get there?
Yeah, like crazy Pete, Mad Peter is like dying.
Yeah, no, that guy. Yeah, no fancy paper collar to help soak up the venom. Cool. Well, thank you all so much. This was a delightful journey into Hammerland, and I am looking forward to having everybody back on the show very soon to talk about some other awesome, scary flicks.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you. This is great.
Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.